want to cut this very complex shape. One thing to keep in mind, for safety's sake, is that we don't want our hands very close to any of the blades. We want to work with larger pieces. They're safer. So the process of how to make this, the steps that you take, are very important. For making this piece, we should start out from a larger block, such as this. Now here I've cut on the table saw, which you can have somebody cut for you, this rabbet. This was taken away from this 4x4, making this extrusion. As you can see, this has the extrusion in it, that similar profile. Now you can see that holding this onto a saw may be problematic, such a small shape. It would be very dangerous to cut these angles. From this though, from a larger piece, we can do something very safe. Now I've gone ahead and marked with a pencil to give me a guide as to what cuts I want to make. Notice the profile matches up with this profile, so that this cut here is indicated approximately by that pencil mark. The pencil mark is a reference. It just reminds me of if I'm doing things correctly. Likewise, if I were to match up the profiles, the extrusion, I can then mark my other side, just to remind me of which angle, which orientation I am trying to get. Again, the purpose of this video is to show you that working from a large piece is much safer than working with smaller pieces. The last step on this whole process will be to release this piece. Throughout the whole machining of this piece, we want to hold on to something larger. Okay, so approaching any tool, it is very important that you clean the area around. It doesn't mean that it has to be spotless, but any kind of sawdust that builds up will interfere. Make sure the area is clean. That's pretty good. This saw can be adjusted, as we said before, to any angle that we want to. Now, in order to get this angle here, it is a 45 degree. So we will adjust this to 45 degrees, lock it in place. As we had talked about before, the most important thing of this tool is that you have to rest your material on the table and on the fence. Your material has to be in contact with the table and the fence all the time when you are cutting. Your piece has to be on the table and against the fence. Now, in order to make this safer, I'm using another piece of wood as a backing board. This spans one side. It doesn't go all the way across. So if I place my material on the table, I am now holding both the material and this backing board against the fence. It's in contact with the table and it's in contact with the fence. 45 degrees. If we orient it with our marks that we had before, we can see that this orientation will give us that cut. This one can be oriented in this way in order to get that angle. So our initial cut will be this. Now our backing board will never be hit by the blade, but what it will do is it will allow your material that you're cutting off to be free. Now that is important all around because machinery will move with some amount of force, and that exertion can throw pieces that are not held in. Imagine if the blade is spinning and now this little piece is trapped in between the blade and the fence. Since it has nowhere to go, the potential for it to kick back, the potential for it to fly, the potential for it to ricochet. Those things have to be, you have to be aware of them. Glasses, all the time, use glasses. Now to orient where I want to make the cut, make sure you don't press the trigger and you can lower the blade. Moreover, you can lift up the guide, make sure you're not pressing the trigger, and lower the blade until you align that pencil mark with the blade. Pencil mark is going to be on this side of the blade. Pencil mark is going to be on this side of the blade. Now, it's very important that you hold this material through the entire cut. You don't want to move it around. You don't want to jostle it. You want the blade to stay aligned with the cut and to not have any kind of resistance. If you twist this, you're bound to hit the side. And again, that's a potential for kickback. All of that can be avoided simply by holding the pieces to the table and to the fence. How much pressure do you want to exert? How much force do you want to hold the piece with? Well, it's a relative term. You have to be firm, but not with a nervous tautness. A firm handshake is what I usually explain is the amount of force to exert on these pieces. Now, to be very, very safe, you want to first place the palm down on the tool and hold it from above. So if I were to hold this piece here, putting my hand down, I am forcing my piece down this way. That way it's always in contact with the table and the fence. I'm going to lower the blade, align it with the pencil mark that I just made. Now, I'm forcing this way. Now I can turn it on. After I turn it on, I would lower it and make our cut. This piece has no resistance now. It's not trapped. It's much safer that way, and you can simply pull the piece out after the saw has stopped rotating. Now to make this cut, I'm placing the scrap back on here. It'll show where the original pencil mark was on. Now I need to turn this around this way so that line is oriented in the way that I want it. And here, I'm going to use the very point. I'm going to expose the blade and align it with the corner. I can move my head around so that I can see exactly where the blade is going to ultimately cut. There. Again, hold it with pressure so that it's against the table and against the fence. Put your palm down. After you're holding it, and with constant pressure, don't move it. Now you can turn the saw on. Matching the profiles, we can begin to get an orientation. This is what we want to make. This is where we're starting from. So if I were to place this up here on top, I can trace a line, and that line will indicate approximately where I want this cut. Likewise, if I were to place this, again, matching the profiles, such, then we can place this on top and give ourselves a guideline. Saw is aligned align to a 45-degree cut. Don't forget your glasses. And we align our blade with our pencil mark. Lift the blade up, apply pressure so your material is touching the table, touching the fence. And that's our first cut. Now to get our second cut and to remind us that we're doing something correctly, again, we align our pieces together. And since we did this cut, we actually erased our original guideline. So measure twice, cut once. It's a good idea to simply give yourself a sketch line. That way you know exactly what angle you're cutting at. And if you want to orient it in this fashion, you likewise will have a pencil mark that reminds you which angle you're to set the saw at. So if we turn it in this direction, it aligns actually with what we have here. The saw is at 45. Depending upon how we turn our stock, we can get to the alignment of that. Just want to make sure that I am cutting this correctly. And as we can see, it's going to cut right through that corner. So that's exactly where I will align the blade. From this corner to the blade. The blade will be on the right-hand side of that corner. So we'll expose the blade again and then lower it without turning it on. And we can align the teeth to that very corner. Again, very important, you apply pressure down to the table and against the fence. Try to avoid extending your thumb as I have right now, for obvious reasons. Really, what you need to do is apply pressure so that this is firm and consistently at the same location. What you want to do is, while you're cutting, is to not jostle it. If you place your fingers as such, it's a little bit safer. And we're applying pressure down and into the fence. Align the teeth with the corner. Raise the blade, turn it on. Notice that I lowered the blade entirely, made the cut, and you can take a pause if you see that you're making a lot of smoke, if it's harder wood, or if it's a very intricate cut. You can always lessen the pressure. You can always turn it off, and then continue your cut. So now, as you can see, one side came a little bit better than the other. But as you can see, we have these two ends, one end over here and one end over here, that we're beginning to machine to make these pieces. Now we can begin to think about cutting these off. So the thickness of what I want to make is this thickness here, so I can make a line. Apologies, make a line there. So it'll give us some kind of indication where the cut is to be made. I'm going to go ahead and draw this a little bit clearer with a square. Okay. We readjust our saw, make it 90 degrees now. Lock it into place. Make sure you're wearing your glasses. Now I'm aligning the blade with a pencil mark. Putting your hand low and holding the piece firmly. Thus we release the geometry and our fingers are never really close to where the action is happening, never very close to the danger of the blade. Used properly, every single machine is safe. The purpose of this demonstration is to show you that intricate cuts made into small pieces have to be planned. Again, now, put your palm down and hold the piece firmly on the table and against the fence. We'll align the blade with our pencil mark and go ahead and cut. Now, something like this, it's getting rather small and dangerous for this tool. You should contemplate using a different tool, something like a bandsaw. So there's always going to be some amount of waste. There's always going to be some amount of material that you will not be able to use. Incorporate that within all of your stock that you get. Incorporate that as part of your process.